Welcome to Essentials Explained. This is our second video covering lookups and the index match formula. If you missed the first video, I'll include a link above and in the description. Otherwise, let's dive into the Excel. So back in our Excel, we want to pull in our customer lookup information. And so if I go to our customer lookup file, I can see that it is a similar list with anonymized store numbers on the left, a owner column for the franchisee, and then the ownership category. So ownership size or ownership status. So we have some corporate offices in here. And so I'm going to copy this and I'm just going to paste this back into my raw data file. I'm just going to open this up and give myself a couple more rows so I have some more room. And then maybe I'll actually just hide this for now so that I can have an easier view of my customer lookup. I'm just going to link each one of these up and I'll write these individually and then talk about how to write this formula in an efficient and quick manner. So owner, what do we want? Our index is our owner. That is what we would like to return. And then our match will help us find our row number, and our lookup value will be our anonymized store number and the anonymized store table in our lookup table. I want an exact match, and I will copy that down. Let's do a couple quick checks. See some that are pretty high. Store 6 is pterodactyl, store 5 marine biologist, and store 11 is also marine biologist. Looks like it's pulling through correctly. One more time, just in case you missed it. Index, what do you want? You want your ownership category for this column. How are you going to find it? You're going to find it with your match. You're going to look up your store number. And you're going to look that up on your lookup array, which is the anonymized store number in your lookup table. You want an exact match, close that, copy it down, and we can do a couple quick checks just like we did in the last one. Store 7, pterodactyl, large franchisee, looks good. And maybe store 19, that is large franchisee, lowest denominator. Store 19, large franchisee, lowest denominator. Great. I'm just going to make these a slightly different color so that I know this is pulling from my customer lookup, this is pulling from my product lookup. And let's talk about how to write this a little bit quicker, because the fastest way to work in Excel is not to ever redo your work. What I did was I rewrote each of these formulas. That is not best practice. What is going to be best practice is writing this formula once, just like we did in cell H2, and dragging that to the right. So I just did that, and that formula didn't work. And the reason is because I haven't set up my addresses to be the right combination of absolute and relative references. So if you're not familiar with these, the $ in Excel indicates that this is an absolute reference. So what this is saying is this range address will stay in column O even if it changes columns. And this will stay in row 2 even if it changes rows. So absolute reference has a $ in front of it, relative reference does not. What we see in this formula when it's dragged over is our array was locked in place, so that didn't change. It's still in our owner column. And our lookup value was a relative reference, and so that was dragged over into the product, which is why we're returning this NA, because we're trying to look up product A on our anonymized store number table. What I want to do is update this formula to have the right combination of absolute and relative references. Let's use F4 to quickly toggle through these different options. And so for my array, what I want is I want it to stay in my rows. I want it to stay in row 2 through row 101, but I actually want it to move columns. I want to be able to drag it over to column P. And so I'm going to remove the $ in front of my column, leave it in front of my row. My match. What I want is I want this to stay in this column, but I actually want to be able to move it across my rows. And so let's keep our column absolute and keep our row relative. Our lookup value we don't want to change, and so I'll leave that absolute all the way across the board. And now when I drag that over to the right, you can see our lookup array has moved over to our ownership category. Our lookup value has stayed in column A, and our lookup array has not changed. And so let me just drag this down just to prove that it's working even across the rows. And so you can see even in row 6, our lookup value is able to move across rows because we've left this row range relative. Understanding how these absolute and relative references work will be incredibly important in upgrading your Excel proficiency. What you always want to do is be able to write one formula once and then copy and paste it all throughout your file instead of having to rewrite and recreate every single formula. So now that we've covered lookups and absolute and relative references, let's talk about augmenting our data to be able to understand it better. So if I use a pivot table here and I drag in this product description and I drag in the date and the revenue, this data is again still somewhat hard to read because what I want to actually be able to look at is, are there any trends within the paint color? So blue paint versus red paint versus yellow paint. Or are there any trends within maybe the specific pricing? So maybe this premium offering versus the basic offering. So what I would actually like to do is add a couple columns that will help me easily toggle those. So let's say I'm going to go back to my raw data. I'm going to ungroup this so I can see my product description. And what I want to do is I actually wanted to add 2 additional columns here. And so I'm going to drag this over. I'm going to call this, let's say, paint color. And let's say this is price bucket. And so for my paint color, this is just red, blue, yellow, red, blue, yellow. And then for my price bucket, looks like we have basic and premium. All right. I want to add 2 additional columns that will tell me what is the color of my paint and what is the price category of my paint so that I can easily toggle it in my pivot table. So I add 2 columns here. I'm just going to link this to the description to make my life easy. And then ultimately I'm going to use an index match. So an index, what do I want? What I want is the paint color. I'm going to lock that in its row, leave the column flexible. I'm going to use a match to look up my product. I'm going to lock that in its column, and then I'm going to use a lookup array on my anonymized product name, lock that in place, exact match, and fill down and drag to the right. And so let's do a couple quick checks for our product A, red paint, basic, that looks right. Product B, blue paint, basic. Product B, product F, yellow paint, premium, great. And so now if I go back to my pivot table, and one trick here, you can either make a new one or you can go back and hit refresh, because I put these columns in the existing pivot table field, it will expand and include these new columns. And so if instead of looking at the product description, I wanted to look just at the paint color, or if I wanted to, let's just say I copy this, instead of looking at the paint color, I looked at the price bucket. Now it gives me a better sense of exactly what are the trends that might be driving the overall change in business. So is it driven by a consumer preference away from a certain color of paint? Is it driven by a pricing action or a specific product difference? But being able to view these separately will help you view your data and understand what's going on with your business. And again, what you can do is you can copy this and drag in other categories and subcategories. So if I want to view the price bucket within the ownership category, I can easily see here, what are the pricing trends within each of my ownership groups. One formatting preference here, I like to go up to design, do subtotals, show them at the bottom of the group. This is more intuitive for me. And then especially when I have space, I like a blank row, makes it easier for me to read. But this way, your table will be easier to understand. And so you can look within each of these groups and see, wow, corporate at the premium level has really fallen off, where maybe other groups haven't seen as much of a change. And then last thing, just to make sure we did this correctly, let's copy this in. I'm going to remove our ownership category and just drag in this price description. This will be a pretty easy check for us just to make sure our index match is working. All our blue paint descriptions are in basic, all our premiums are in premium. And if I want to double check and make sure I did the paint color right, I can just drag that down as well. Great, that seems to be working. So you can use pivot tables to look at your data, to understand your data, and also to check to make sure you set up your data correctly. If you're interested in understanding the basics of pivot tables, please check out the next video in our series. Otherwise, Thank you for joining us at Essentials Explained, and please comment any questions or feedback you have below.